City Limits Stand-Up Desk. I'm here with Councilmember Antonio Reynoso from Bushwick. Very pleased to have you here. And Bushwick has been coming up a lot in the broader conversation about rezoning in the city and the broader conversation about Bushwick. There's been no rezoning there, and we're already seeing it. But you live there, you represent it.
Right.
How do you characterize what's going on in Bushwick now? Has it?
The increase in rents are very obvious. We've seen studios that could have gone for $700-800 just 10 years ago now going for $2,000 right in Bushwick. So the increase in rent has really gone up, and I agree with the statement that gentrification is going to come whether you rezone a district or not, especially when you're close to the waterfront or neighboring recently gentrified district. At the end of the day, it's a wave of money, and it's very hard to stop. So I don't necessarily believe the notion that rezonings bring about gentrification. I think the popularity of New York has done that all by itself.
And what effect has the gentrification occurring so far? Has it changed the character of the neighborhood? Has it displaced people? Like, what is the impact so far?
So yes, there has been displacement, and we also know that now 44% of renters in Bushwick now pay more than a third of their income in rent. And that's a huge issue, that they're considered rent burdened. And a portion of that are even more overburdened to pay at least half of their income in rent. So we've seen that happening. We've also seen the displacement of families moving further east to East New York, Cypress Hills, and these other locations that are currently more affordable. But what we've seen more than anything is the speculation. We've seen outside investors coming into Bushwick, purchasing 1, 2, 19, 20 buildings at a time, almost having no one in them, and just waiting for either rezoning to happen or to tear down buildings. They buy 3 buildings in a row, they tear them down and then build one tower or one tall building. So we've seen the speculation happen, and that speculation is starting to drive folks out too. And of course the pressures, new tactics by landlords to evict tenants in rent-regulated buildings, and they're using construction as harassment now, doing construction in the building while people are still living in it. So if 1A is empty but 1B has a tenant, they'll just start doing construction on 1A and make it almost impossible for anyone to live on the same floor that the construction is happening, and they're using that to evict folks too. So those are things we're seeing.
One of the things I know you've complained about, and others as well, is out-of-character development.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, does that occur under the existing zoning envelope that just wasn't built out before, or are people getting variances and other things to get permission to do that?
No, it's actually happening under the current zoning context. So what we're seeing is the R6, and not R6A or B, which does have its height limits on it. So what folks are doing, again, they're trying to take several buildings that are next to each other, 3-family homes, for example, tearing all 3 homes down and then building one 6-story building. And because there is no height limit, how they build it is up to the developer or the owner. And a lot of times the taller buildings are more attractive or can fetch more money in these neighborhoods, so they do that. So what we're seeing now is where we used to have a beautiful row of 3-family homes across the board for blocks, we're seeing in between tall 6, 4, 5-story buildings across the board, and it is breaking the context of those blocks where we don't think it's appropriate.
So in response to this, you and your colleague, Councilman Espinal, started the Bushwick Community Plan. Talk about that.
Yes.
What is that all about?
We want to figure out a way to do a rezoning and get it done the right way with very little, how do I say it? We don't want the protesters. We don't want the community fighting the council members. We don't want this dog and pony show with the mayor at the end of a vote or near a vote where we're fighting for 5% of something. None of that's going to happen. We want to do this right. We want to do it with the community, with the administration. And I think we finally built a plan that hasn't been done anywhere else, where we're going to see something at the end that we all agree on, and it's going to be one of the first, hopefully non-controversial rezonings that the city puts through. The system we have, for example, in East New York, in East Harlem, they built a system by which the community independently worked on a plan and presented it to the mayor. In this one, the community is in the same room with the agencies working out a plan. They have subcommittees. We have 70 members on our steering committee. There's organizations, there's residents, there's business owners, there's developers, And then we have an executive committee of 7 members that help bring information to the steering committee. We've had community meetings regarding economic development, transportation, housing, and so forth. We're missing like 2 more of those community meetings where we get 200, 300, and 400 people show up. And the administration is going through it with us, so they understand what it is we're going to be presenting, and they let us know where they think that they disagree, and we might need to modify. But again, it's a community plan in which we get a community-based process from the bottom up, but we involve the city from the beginning to allow us to help us with the technical stuff and make sure that whatever we present to them is something that is feasible.
And what's your role? Are you driving the process? Are you outside the room waiting for them to finish up and give it to you? Like, how are you at that table?
I consider myself, I'm like a police officer, right? I just make sure that both parties are abiding by basic rules, right, or negotiations in good faith. Outside of that, I have no voting role in the steering committee, so I can't vote. I don't participate in most of the meetings. I don't get invited to most of the meetings, neither does Rafael, our Councilmember Espinal. We really want this to be a community-led project. So we put in the steering committee together. Everyone's invited to every subcommittee meeting. If they can go tomorrow if there's a meeting. They're also invited to the larger community meetings. But again, my role for the most part is to make sure that both sides are working well together, that there is good faith negotiations, but also to continue to build trust. The trust issue is very difficult right now. The community thinks that DCP and HPD have an agenda, and DCP and HPD think that the community is going to ask for too much. And because of that, it's hard to get them to the middle. But that's our job, is to figure out a way that they both work together, and eventually we get a great plan in Bushwick.
And what do you think the timeline is?
So we're looking at unfortunately, at the end of next year. So this happens long after our election, which is another issue that a lot of folks thought we were doing this because we wanted to do it before an election, or that it was important that the timeline coincides with our priorities, and it's not necessarily true. In the beginning, we hoped that it can happen before the end of 2017. Through negotiations and the work that they're doing, we've noticed that we've had to push the timeline back a year. It's not something that I'm a fan of, because as long as we don't rezone, a lot of these non-contextual developments are going to go up, and that's a concern to me. But the community is the driving force here, and they said that they want to push it back a couple of more months, and that's what happens.
So we got a question via Twitter from Trigger Thomas, who asks, how will this not be a repeat of what happened in East New York, where the community was frustrated with the process? You talked a little bit about that, but community is an all-encompassing term, right?
Yes,
you represent hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. There are bound to be folks who say, this is not what we wanted, we weren't part of this. How are you going to deal with that?
So the good thing here is that the 70, 80 people that we've brought in are the usual suspects that you would expect, and also folks that we've never given an opportunity to be a part of a process like this. There's not one organization or one group that has not been invited to this event, and it's happened to this process. It's happened for 3 years. This is not something we did in 3 months. It's been a 3-year process that I started after my first year here in the City Council. We've tried our best to be as inclusive as possible. We have organizations like Make the Road New York, Churches United for Fair Housing, Brooklyn Legal Services Corporation A, all these organizations that do this type of work, that have worked with tenants and understand what's going on in these communities. I think we're going to have them. We're bound to have them, but they're going to have to go up against the community steering committee, not the council members, because again, the process is a community-based process, and I would challenge them to ask whether or not those community-based organizations or these community folks are either not Bushwick or don't represent Bushwick in a diverse way, and also if they've been inclusive or exclusive and not inclusive. So I think part of what we were thinking was to deal with that issue before it got there. So we don't feel that we're going to get an anti-Bushwick rezoning group to come out against us, because every single group is in the planning committee.
I know you say nothing has been presupposed or preordained, but you refer to it as a rezoning process. We all do. Is it likely, certain, possible that rezoning is part of it? Is there any chance that there won't be a rezoning?
There's a chance that there won't be a rezoning. I don't want that to happen. I feel like we've put in a lot of time and resources on this, but the communities, their goal is mostly preservation. They understand that there's opportunities for height in certain areas in the community, and I think that once everything is hashed out, we can get to something. But there is a possibility that the community itself doesn't think that what they're trying to propose is actually going to be something that's positive, or they don't want any rezoning, they want a good rezoning, and that's important. So there's a possibility that there is no rezoning, but for the most part, right now, what I've seen, the goal is to have this happen.
When it comes to the housing element, different council members have had different takes in terms of whether they want a mix of income supported by subsidized housing or to focus on the lower end or perhaps do fewer units. I know you probably haven't gotten to that point yet, but what's your take on that? If you had to choose between those two, which way would you kind of guide the stakeholders?
Right, so fortunately, Bushwick has a strong middle class, within it. Unlike Williamsburg, that right now is mostly either you're extremely rich or extremely poor. There is almost no middle class outside of locations like Lindsay Park and some areas where there's some home ownership. But in Bushwick, it's a little different. The incomes are more broad and there's more diversity in income. I think that the problem we have is that, again, 40%, not the 44 that's overburdened, but 40% of the district makes less than $24,000 a year. And that's a reality, and that's something that the administration has to look at. If the majority of the folks in my district are making less than almost $20,000 a year, then we have to look at building housing for them as well. A lot of those folks also do live in housing, which kind of skews that income band. That makes it so that it's so low, so I think it's closer to 26, 28, but that's a personal opinion of mine. The BCP could disagree with me, or the Bushwick Community Planning Committee. But I think we need to build housing for the extremely poor folks, and in doing so makes it very difficult for us to have a low, middle, and high, right? I think that the market rate and the market is going to kind of drive what happens thereafter with the middle class and the market rate housing. So I guess it's going to be a balance, a little bit of both, but we have to pay attention to the extremely poor people in Bushwick as well.
The administration's approach to the rezoning process itself and the housing end, there's been some evolution since this started with the talk about East New York when he was first elected. Do you feel as though they have made progress in terms of having a better process and a better approach? Is there still a way to go? What do you think of how the administration, they're in the room with you now and with their stakeholders, which is different from other neighborhoods, but I get the sense that you still would like to push them a little further.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that Department of City Planning, they are planners. That's what they do. But they're not organizers. They're not folks out in the community necessarily, like understanding how negotiations work. They hold a lot of things that they think are important close to their chest. The trust is not necessarily there with communities. I think it's something that they're starting to build inside DCP, and you can see it happening in this plan, in the community's plan, where in the beginning DCP was just not getting exactly how it is that they want to work with the community, and now the relationships have been built. I wouldn't say they're friends, but it's an amicable relationship. It's very positive right now. I think there's an attempt there that we can't continue to go through these rezonings if every time the mayor goes through one, it's like the mayor's pushing gentrification, he's pushing displacement. It's the tale of two cities, it's the complete opposite, right? The mayor wants to figure out a way that he pushes a rezoning and it's a win. And I think we have the formula in Bushwick, and I think we can make it happen. I do want to say that I think that the mayor's agenda is always pushed more than anyone else's agenda, and I think until he doesn't change that, where some of the interests and things that are important for the community are paid attention to or given priority without compromise, he's always going to have a hard time. It can't be his way or the highway. It can't be DCP's way or the highway. What the community says has to have value, and if they put more value in that and more priority on that, I think we could do better. But again, I do think that they're making progress in their end.
So let's talk about the council's role and the trust issue. Graham Serralo at gserralo86 tweets, "How can residents trust the rezoning process is legit given the revelations about Councilmember Greenfield?" The story this week about the councilmember who is the land use chair having a lot of money squirreled away in a state account that was somewhat obscured from transparency. That role of money from developers and others in the process is always there to undermine trust. Do you think that the trust in your process suffers from revelations like this one this week?
I would say that, I want to be a counter to that, right? I want to say a couple of things. First, this is a community-based plan. If you don't trust the community, then, that's on you, right? Like, I'll challenge anyone to say that this plan is something that I've driven, that Councilmember Aspinall has driven, that DCP has driven, that the land use chair, Councilmember Greenfield, we're not a part of the process at all at this moment. The recommendations that are going to come from the community is going to be something that they're going to get with technical expertise and guidance from the administration and the city of New York. So again, you might not trust the ULIP process, but the pre-ULIP process, the work that we're doing right now, is definitely something that is independent and being pushed by the community. The second thing is, you kind of have to go through a timeline and look at the work that Councilmember Greenfield has done in the Land Use Committee and see where in any part of that you might see a discrepancy where he was influenced, for example. A lot of the work we do, and I disagree with this, is that member deference runs the show in the city council. If a council member doesn't want something, they don't get it. If a council member wants something, they get it, regardless of what the rest of the city is feeling or the rest of the council members are feeling. If there's a city-owned site that wants to go 100 stories in Councilmember Chin's district, I can't challenge that because it's 100 stories. That she has full deference. Whatever she says goes. I'm not a fan of that because I don't think it plays to a citywide plan as to how we should be building in our city. But again, the member deference goes to the council member from the district, not the chair. The chair kind of makes sure that at the edges, 1-2%, he's getting people to get things done and working on a schedule. But I don't believe that Councilmember Greenfield has ever exerted undue influence through this process. Even though I disagree with the system that we're in and the processes that we use, but within that process, I don't feel that the money has influenced him to this point.
Do you take developer money?
No, I don't take any developer money. I have $0 now. I do want to go back and check again. The filing happened a week ago, and money comes from everywhere, online, through checks. I got over almost 600 donations, so I do want to check and make sure. But I don't believe I have any, and if I do, it's probably like $200, and I'll give that back as soon as I find out. But I don't need to take developer money. I get a lot of donations from my local community members, and the campaign finance and the matching funds program really does help us, focus on the little guys and on the folks that we want to represent. So I don't take developer money.
So last question, you referred to the fact that there is an election this year. It's pretty quiet so far, but you and most of your council member colleagues are facing re-election. In a lot of those districts, there is talk about a potential rezoning. If you were a constituent in one of those other districts, what are the kind of questions you'd be asking your council member about the rezoning? What should voters be, how should they be holding their council members accountable, given that the vote on these proposals and the council member deference is going to occur after the election? What would you want to hear?
I want to hear that the council member is engaging with the community in a process by which they get to choose exactly what it is they want to see. I'm understanding their limits, right? A lot of the things that happen right now are elected officials having a town hall to introduce the community to a broader, general plan of what they want to do. I think that the council members should take a step back, allow for the communities to, they plan to be born through the community, and that really helps, change the narrative about who's in control. But this is something that just doesn't happen. I'm fortunate that I'm a new council member. I worked with Councilmember Reynoso, so I know how that process works, but I could do whatever I want so long as the community is supportive of it. And I've been able to engage in that style, that inclusive, community-driven process. But other council members, that type of work is completely foreign to them. They've usually been responsible for doing most of the work internally by themselves. I would say in this time and the climate that we see in our political world, that they look to change those ways. And I think that the city of New York or the administration knows that. And they don't want it to be just a council member driven project. They do want to figure out a way to include the community some way, shape, or form so that in the long run or at the end of this process, they're actually going to see less, I guess, discontent. But again, I think the administration is dealing with a lot of those issues, and council members should get on board. And to the community, just demand it. A lot of these folks just don't ask their council members to be a part of the process. I think a lot of council members, they care more about the TA and the block leader than they do about people in the administration.